I'm asked to comment on the value of lives. Now, let me tell you something right off the bat that will demonstrate to you a little bit how easy and difficult it is to value lives. After 9/11, the BP oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon explosion in the Gulf of Mexico, the Boston Marathon bombings, the General Motors ignition switch tragedy, the shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut, those first graders, the Virginia Tech shootings, the Aurora, Colorado movie shootings, the Pulse nightclub shootings in Orlando by that terrorist attack, 48 dead, the Las Vegas Harvest concert shootings from the Mandalay Hotel, that deranged gunman, 58 dead. In all of those cases, I'm asked by a president, an attorney general, the Congress, a governor, a mayor, the president of Virginia Tech, please come in and design and administer a program to compensate next of kin or the victims themselves if they survive these horrors, and, distribute compensation. Now, let me say at the outset, very important, calculating what to provide people in the way of compensation is not heavy lifting. It really isn't. There are people in this room that could do what I do. If you have a good calculator and you know how much money you have available to distribute, and from that, it's not rocket science to come up with an amount, a liquidated amount to distribute. I do what judges and juries and lawyers do every day in the United States. In every courtroom, in every village, hamlet, city, town, what would the person have earned over a work life but for the tragedy? What should be added for pain and suffering, emotional distress, equals an amount. Now, you have to make certain assumptions about the person's work life, work history, what they would have done, but I must say, judges and juries do it every day, so I'm asked to do it. What I don't consider, don't come to me and say, my husband had dignity. My wife was a hero. My husband exhibited courage. My wife was an angel. No, rabbis and priests may get into that subject about dignity and honor. Mine is a cold calculation based on American law governing the calculation of damage. No. Valuing lives, people sometimes seem to think that I'm a rabbi or Solomon here. Well, that person was very courageous on 9/11. I'll add another 500,000. I don't do anything like that. I tell family survivors all the time, courage, everybody was courageous that day. Heroism, everybody exhibited heroism. The calculation of value for lives is rarely a difficult assignment. Everything's relative, but it's rarely difficult. What is very, very difficult, what is actually debilitating, if you want to know the truth, is the emotion associated with those calculations. The emotion. When people come to see you confidentially, in person, face to face, shut the door, very private, well then my law degree is of very little use. Better a divinity degree or a degree in psychiatry, because the stories you hear in all of these tragedies When people come to see you, it is debilitating. You do not sleep and you never forget. 24-year-old woman after 9/11, sobbing, came to see me. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband at the World Trade Center. He was a fireman. And he left me with our 2 children, 6 and 4. Now, I see your calculation. You're going to give me $2 million tax-free. I want it in 30 days. Mrs. Jones, 30 days. This is public taxpayer money coming out of the Department of the Treasury. They've got to do their due diligence. They've got to go through the bureaucracy. You'll get your check, but it might be 60 or 90 days. No, 30 days. Mrs. Jones, why do you need the money in 30 days? Why? I'll tell you why, Mr. Feinberg. I have terminal cancer. I have 10 weeks to live. My husband was going to survive me and take care of our 2 children. They're now going to be orphans. I have got to get this money. I've got to set up a trust. I've got to find a guardian. I'm not going to be around. I haven't got much time, and I've got to move fast. Well, we ran down to the Treasury, my staff. We pushed it through. We got her the money. 8 weeks later, she died. Now, stuff like that is what is so difficult. 31-year-old woman comes, sobbing. I thought she was going to collapse in my office. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband at the World Trade Center. He was a fireman. Now you're going to give me $2.2 million. Mr. Feinberg, you don't understand. Bring my husband back. How's that? You can keep the money. Mr. Feinberg, let me explain. My husband, on 9/11, ran into the lobby of the World Trade Center and brought 20 people to safety. He looked back and he saw another 20 people were trapped. He ran back into the building and for a second time brought 20 people to safety. While he was running across the World Trade Center plaza, he was killed by somebody who jumped and hit him like a missile. They both died. If he had taken one step either way, he'd be here today. But somebody jumped like a missile, hit him, and killed them both. Mr. Feinberg, I want to tell you something. Don't tell me there's a God. There is no God. I'll never set foot in a synagogue again. No God could allow this to happen to my husband. That's what's difficult here. One more. All right, we've got some great, in this audience, we've got some real Jewish learning here, right? What would you have done if you were in my position with this one? It's in the movie. A lady comes to see me, and we had to help her into the room because we didn't think she'd be able to do it on her own, crying. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband on 9/11 at the World Trade Center. He was a fireman. And he left me with our 3 children, 6, 4, and 2. Mr. Feinberg, he was Mr. Mom. Every day that he wasn't at the firehouse, he was home, teaching our 6-year-old how to play baseball, teaching the 4-year-old the alphabet, reading a bedtime story to the 2-year-old. And what a cook! Mr. Mom, he cooked all our meals. He was the gardener around the house. Mr. Feinberg, it doesn't matter what you give me in compensation. Without Mr. Mom, the only reason I haven't gone up to the roof of our home and jumped to join him are the 3 children. But without Mr. Mom, my life is over. And we helped her out of the room. The next day, I get a telephone call from a lawyer in Queens. Mr. Feinberg, you met yesterday with the woman with the 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2, about Mr. Mom? I go, yes. Very, very just heart-wrenching. He goes, yeah. Mr. Feinberg, I got to tell you something. You got a tough job. I don't envy what you have to do. But I got to tell you something, Mr. Feinberg. She doesn't know that Mr. Mom has 2 other kids by his girlfriend in Queens, 5 and 3, you see. And when you cut your check from the 9/11 fund, there's not 3 surviving children, there's 5 surviving children. But I'm sure you'll do the right thing. Click, he hangs up, you see. Do you tell her? Do you tell her about the second life that Mr. Mom was living in Queens, see? Or do you keep your mouth shut, you see? We went around 2 weeks, the staff and myself. What do we do? Finally, at 3 a.m. one night, I wake up and my wife, what's the problem? Well, the woman with the she doesn't know about the 2 other kids. Should we tell her? Don't you dare tell her. How dare you? She's already suffering. And now you're going to tell her about the 2 other. Don't you? Well, that solved that problem. We cut 1 check to the wife and the 3 kids, and without her knowledge, we cut a separate check to the girlfriend as the guardian of the 2 kids. That's it. I'm not a family counselor. I don't know all the facts. You'll see in the movie, though, that's what we did. We just cut the 2. We never said. Now, that was what, 15 years ago. I'll bet you by now they know about this, but not my place. So you see, the problem in all of these programs, in valuing lives and determining compensation, it's the emotion that is so difficult and so challenging to come up with the problem. Now let's examine some of these programs, valuing lives. The 9/11 fund, right? Public taxpayer money. You'll never see a program like that again. Never. That was a one-off patriotic response from the American people to the victims of 9/11. If you think that it's sound public policy to use public money only to help certain innocent victims, it doesn't work that way. You should have read some of the letters I got during my administration of the 9/11 fund. Dear Mr. Feinberg, my son died in Oklahoma City. Where's my check? Dear Mr. Feinberg, I don't get it. My daughter died in the basement of the World Trade Center in the original 1993 attacks committed by the very same type of people. How come I'm not eligible? And it's not just terrorism. Dear Mr. Feinberg, you got to explain to me. Last year, my wife saved 3 little girls from drowning in the Mississippi River, and then she drowned a heroine. Where's my check? You better be careful about carving out for very special treatment only certain victims of life's misfortune. Everybody else, fend for yourself, but for those people, here's public money. Now, I think the 9/11 fund was the right thing to do. I think it was sound public policy from the perspective of the American people, not from the perspective of the victims, but from the perspective of the American people. I think it was the right thing to do, and I defend it all the time. Don't ever do it again. Don't ever decide that you victims, innocent, should enjoy special treatment. Everybody else, you're on your own. Go hire a lawyer. You people will take care of you. It's not the American way. Now, here's another interesting thing about valuing lives. And I think the people in this audience can appreciate this too. When you tell somebody we're going to provide you compensation, $2 million, $3 million, $5 million. It is very, very rare that somebody objects to the money you're offering them. Very rare. Unless you're offering more to the next door neighbor. Everybody counts other people's money. It's human nature, you see. Mr. Feinberg, you're giving me $4 million tax-free. How come my next-door neighbor's getting $5 million tax-free? First of all, don't assume that your next-door neighbor is getting $5 million tax-free. But put that aside. Even if your next-door neighbor is getting $5 million, that's because your next-door neighbor's wife who died was earning more than your husband. So there's economic loss under the American legal system. So you know how far that gets you? Zero. Any explanation like that doesn't get you very far. People get annoyed. They get angry. They get frustrated. You never even met my wife and you're giving me $1 million less than my next door neighbor. What do you have against my wife? You never even met her. I knew her. You might as well keep your mouth shut. You're not going to get anywhere with that. That's the problem, you see. When you give money away, and it's collectively, there's other people, and they all talk. And that is a serious problem. Now, there are other problems that arise. Again, not so much the calculation as much as the emotions surrounding the calculation. I invited in 9/11, in all of these programs, anybody who wants to come and see me personally. I'll see them privately, face to face, and they can tell me whatever they want to say. Now, let me tell you, when people come to see me, they rarely talk about money. Rarely. Behind closed doors, they come for one of two reasons. First, to validate the memory of a lost loved one. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my wife at the World Trade Center, and I'm here for a private hearing, and I want to tell you that my wife was an angel. And it's my private hearing. I'd like to show you a video of our wedding 25 years ago. Mr. Jones, you can do that. It'll have no bearing on the compensation that I'm going to provide. You go, no. I want you to see what those murderers did to my angel. See, there she is. I looked a lot better then. That was 25 years ago. And look at her. See how she's smiling, and then tears come down his face. And he takes the hearing, the transcript that we made, and he says, I'm going to take this video with the transcript and put it in a safe deposit box so my grandchildren and great-grandchildren can take a view of their mother and what a great lady she was. Or people come to vent about life's unfairness. Mr. Feinberg, my daughter was killed in the World Trade Center by those monsters. Why was our government asleep at the switch? Why did this happen? My daughter never hurt anybody. She went to work that day like any other day, and now she's dust. I don't even have a body, Mr. Feinberg. Not even a body. Let me tell you a thing or two. Venting. Venting about life's unfairness. And there's very, very little you can say. You listen. You listen when people vent about how it went wrong. Mr. Feinberg, I want to tell you something. Don't you tell me there's a God. These rabbis don't know what they're talking about. There is no God. I'll never set foot in a synagogue again. No God could take my little daughter here and dust, and I'm supposed to say what? God? Just listen. There's nothing you can do. Now, you try as best you can to show empathy, but be careful. Empathy is very, very fragile. Very fragile. And you may think that you can articulate empathy I've learned over the years the best way to articulate empathy is to keep your mouth shut. Because people are very, very fragile and angry, and you better be careful, because I make mistakes all the time, see. 9/11, an 82-year-old Jewish man came to see me crying. Mr. Feinberg, I'm 82. I lost my son at the Pentagon. When the planes hit, he escaped, safe. But he thought that his sister was trapped. She also worked at the Pentagon. He went back into the burning building to find her. She had already escaped through a side door. He died looking for her. He couldn't find her. And finally, he was overcome by smoke, and he died. Mr. Feinberg, I want to tell you something. It doesn't matter how much money you give me. A father should never have to bury a son. My life is over. I'm going through the motions. And I looked at him, nice man, and I said to him, Mr. Ginsburg, this is terrible. I know how you feel. This nice man looked at me, and he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, Mr. Feinberg, I want to give you some friendly advice. Don't tell people like me that you know how I feel. You have no idea how I feel, and it sounds hollow and condescending. And my advice to you is be careful how you respond to people like me. Well, I'll never do that again. I'll never do that again. But no matter how hard you try, when you're one-on-one with innocent victims, survivors in grief, watch out. Watch out. In 9/11, a woman came to see me with third-degree burns over 80% of her body, and she survived. And she said, Mr. Feinberg, she came in with all this artificial skin. She was like a mummy. Her eyebrows, eyelashes all singed, no hair, and all this artificial skin. It was a miracle she survived. And she said, Mr. Feinberg, I just want you to know that I'm here because of the grace of God. I was working in the World Trade Center, and I was on the elevator coming down to the lobby before the plane. When the plane hit, the impact of the plane knocked the elevator off the rails, and it stopped on the second floor. And there were 20 other people in that elevator cab with me. And we saw that the elevator was one floor from the lobby. So what we decided to do was cram open the doors of the elevator and shimmy down. It was only about 10 feet, and we'd be on the lobby and we'd run out. What happened, of course, is the minute we opened the door, the airplane fuel had coming down the elevator shaft. So the minute we opened the door and the air went into the elevator cab, it incinerated everybody in the cab. I was behind two other people off on the side. I managed to crawl down and escape with third-degree burns over 80% of my body, and the other 20 people, dust, ashes, incinerated instantly. I managed to get out. I'm so grateful. This woman, I can't believe she survived more than a few more months, but she said, through the grace of God, I'm here. Those are the stories, you see. Valuing lives. Valuing lives isn't the real problem. Everything's relative, but it's not the real problem. Now, occasionally, when you try and value a life, you run into assumptions from the family survivors about what's the appropriate valuation. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my daughter at the World Trade Center. She had just graduated law school and had begun work as a lawyer in this law firm, and she died on 9/11. Now, when you calculate your award, economic loss, Remember, she was going to gradually improve at that law firm. She was going to be a star. And in the 8th year, she would have been made a partner. And in the 11th year, they would have put her name on the letterhead of the firm. Mrs. Jones, the statistics show that your daughter would have stayed at that law firm maybe 3 years, and then she would have done something else. And the idea that you say that in the 11 years from now, she would have been a partner in the law firm, I mean, we can't accept that. What do you mean? You never even met my daughter. I know she was going to really be a star, and she was going to stay there, and she was going to become a partner and then a named partner. Well, you can't, you listen. You try and be nice. But those assumptions are belied by the statistics, by the calculation we make based on certain assumptions. What else can we do? And then there are all sorts of other problems. In the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the Deepwater Horizon, I received in 16 months, I did this, President Obama asked, I did this in 16 months in the oil spill, we received 1,250,000 claims from 50 states. I didn't know the oil got to Washington, D.C. We got 40 claims from Washington. We got 20 claims from Alaska and 35 foreign countries. Sweden, China, Norway, the Congo, we got them. Now, most of these claims, obviously, were not for death or injury, economic loss. I couldn't fish. They closed the Gulf. I make a living fishing. Here's my pole. And I couldn't fish, and I lost $100,000. Pay me. Well, Mr. Jones, do you have records, tax returns that, the spill cost you $100,000? No. We do things with a handshake down here. Well, that may be a handshake, but I'm not paying money on the basis of a handshake. Do you have any checkbook or corporate records? So he gave me something in crayon. It looked all right. So I said to him, Mr. Jones, it's a close call, but all right, you've given me enough. I'm going to cut a check for you for $100,000. You'll have it in 30 days. Now, with it, you'll receive a 1099 from the IRS. He looks at me. I waive it. You can't waive a 1099. I've got to give you the 1099. You can't waive receipt of a 1099. He said to me, you're going to send me that 1099? I go, yeah. Rip up my claim. I don't want the money. Mr. Jones, you're going to pass up $100,000 because you don't want to rip it up. Now, he never probably paid taxes in his life. But those are some of the problems you see when you deal with people after tragedy. Those are the issues that come up. And you may think you're ready to hear what people have to say, but in reality, you're always going to be surprised. You always are. And in every one of these cases, you are, when you hold a hearing privately, you better brace yourself. You better brace yourself for the stories. Now, you see, in cases like the Boston Marathon, the Sandy Hook shootings in Connecticut, the first graders, Virginia Tech, the Pulse nightclub in Florida, that's all private giving. Those are private donations that come in from businesses and the American people all over the country. Dayton, last 2 weeks ago, or a week, 10 days ago, the Dayton shootings, 9 dead. El Paso. In Dayton, unsolicited, about $1.5 million so far. That money is even easier to distribute, but for the emotion. Because when you get a private program like that, you don't have to promise not to sue or anything. Everybody gets the same amount. All lives are equal. If you're dead, We just say, like in the Boston Marathon, 4 dead, an 8-year-old died, and a 55-year-old wage earner died. They get the same. All lives are equal. It's a gift. Now, there are some uplifting benefits to this difficult work that I do. One benefit. You learn about the American people. In a very polarizing time politically, let me tell you, after tragedy, never, ever underestimate the charitable impulse of the American people. It is astounding to me how people turn on cable news or whatever and they see the tragedy and they write a check. They write a check and send it. And it reaffirms my faith in this country. I think it goes back to colonial times. Jews know all about it in terms of doctrinal Jewish books of learning. But as a nation, those Jewish books of learning are basically copied secularly. The Puritans, certainly, back to 17th century Massachusetts, saw the communitarian ethic, the idea we're all in this together. And I must say, after these tragedies, red state, blue state, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. And that's the second uplifting thing about this. When I do these programs for all of the controversy and the angst and the emotionalism, the American people are solidly behind me. I thought after 9/11 fund, I'm giving out all of this taxpayer money, $7.1 billion. I thought that I would be pilloried, criticized. The opposite. To this day, I'll walk down an airplane terminal. Someone will stop me. Are you Mr. Feinberg? I get ready to duck. Mr. Feinberg, thank you. Thank you for the 9/11 fund. That was heroic. What you did, I said, it's what the American people, no, well, yeah, but somebody had to administer that program, and you did it for free. For 33 months, you did it for free. A patriot. And we thank you. President Obama, after the BP oil spill, I brought in the entire family into the Oval Office, and he thanked the family for standing by me, thanked me for my efforts in the BP oil spill fund. I mean, when you take these assignments on, it's nice to know that the public basically is behind you. Now I've got Boeing. 346 people died from those 2 air crashes from 35 foreign countries. I got to figure out who gets the money in the Congo or in Indonesia or Malaysia or China. People died. Well, what does the law of the Congo say about who should get the money? And how do you make sure that the money's going to get into the right hands and isn't going to end up in some Swiss bank account by some despot who announces a new tax or something? I mean, these are issues, you see. These are issues. And we'll have to address. There's always some problem with all of these cases that you have to address. And we find a way to do it. But the emotional part of it is the most difficult. Now, before, I got to stick to the schedule or I'm a dead man. All right. Before we take a few questions, let me tell you, let's leave on sort of an upbeat note, or at least a rather different note. I received one claim in 9/11 like the following. One out of 7,300 claims. I got one like this. A lady comes to see me. She's not sobbing. She's not crying. She's dressed to the nines. She is really all dolled up. She comes to see me and she says, Mr. Feinberg, I asked for this private hearing. That's right. I lost my husband in the World Trade Center. Now, am I right, based on your rules, whatever I tell you won't result in your reducing my award? That's right. This is all confidential, and you don't have to worry about the calculation. All right. I want to tell you, my husband, who died on 9/11, Just want to tell you, Mr. Feinberg, he was scum. He abused me so over 23 years of marriage. I am so relieved that he's dead. And I can't tell you, based on your award, he is worth more to me dead than he ever was alive. And I just want to thank you. There is some justice in this world. And I'm going to take that money. In my first trips, I'm going down to Miami for about 6 weeks to celebrate. And it's good to know I don't have to have him come home and take all of that abuse. And for what you've done, and the American people, I thank you. We are there like this. The hell? And that's one. I'm not sure it's in the movie. It might be. But that's one example, you see. You never know what you're going to hear. You never know. So that's valuing lives. That's how you do it. That's what you confront. And now we have about 10 minutes for questions, and I said we'd leave some time. So, yes, sir.
Did you take personal life insurance into account?
No. Did I take personal life insurance? No. No. Did they have personal life insurance? Some did, some didn't. Had to. Under the statute, creating the 9/11 fund, if somebody had life insurance who died, I was obligated to reduce my awards by that amount. But let me tell you the problem with that. Mrs. Jones, you're going to get $3 million from me, but you have $4 million of life insurance. You owe me $1 million. And I'm trying to get people into the fund. Well, the law gave me discretion. Mrs. Jones, you would get $3 million offset by $4 million in personal insurance. I'm exercising my discretion. We'll still give you $1.2 million. Well, if you do that, I'll come into the fund. 97% of all the people came into the fund. Only 94 people out of 7,300, 94 people opted not to come in and to litigate instead against the airlines, the World Trade Center. They all settled their cases 5 years later. No, there was never a trial on negligence or responsibility for 9/11. 2 people did nothing. They never came into the fund, and they never litigated. Paralyzed by grief, they did nothing. Now, one of those people was a priest who told me, I'm not going to come into the fund, it's God's will. I said, spare me, God's will. Why don't you lost your brother. Why don't you take the $2 million and give it to Catholic Charities? Nope. I don't think that's right. He never came in. Then I went to Brooklyn to visit an 82-year-old Jewish mother. Mrs. Ginsburg, I'm here to tell you that if you don't come into the fund or decide to litigate within 2 weeks, you lose your right under the law to do either. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my son at the World Trade Center, and you're here to talk to me about money? Mrs. Ginsburg, listen to me. I'll help you fill out the form. We're talking about $2.7 million tax-free. Set up an endowment in your son's name at his school or something. Don't lose this money. Mr. Feinberg, leave the application on the kitchen table. She never did anything. You learn that grief can paralyze people, just paralyze them. And those are the two. I didn't mind, particularly if somebody opted out of the program to litigate. Good luck. But people who did nothing, they lost any remedy. Tragic to me. Yes, ma'am. The fund, the 9/11 fund, was just extended. It's part of it's what I call the tail of the original fund. It was extended to help all these firefighters and residents of Lower Manhattan who breathe the guck and now claim cancer, emphysema, other diseases. The fund is now reauthorized and reappropriated, so there are funds to deal with those people. Yes, sir. There have been other tragedies. There's been no 9/11 fund. I think the 9/11 fund is an aberration. It's not part of our heritage, based on self-reliance, buy your own insurance, protect yourself. Government isn't a government of last resort. It shouldn't be in the business of compensating everybody who's injured and killed. And I think over 1,000 people died after Hurricane Katrina. I didn't see any 9/11 fund created there. What was the difference? The difference was people realized that but for the patriotic single example of the 9/11 attack, I think the 9/11 attack is rivaled in American history only by the Civil War, Pearl Harbor, and the assassination of President Kennedy. That's it. And I think the 9/11 fund was a blip, a moment in time. I think if Congress had waited 2 more weeks, there wouldn't have been a 9/11 fund. But there was a singular patriotic reaction, and that's it. Now, this is what you call getting the hook. This is getting the hook. Oh, 5 minutes. Bless you. Two more questions. Yes, ma'am. I mask it pretty well, don't I? Let me tell you, it is not easy. You're a professional. You're asked by the President of the United States to do this, and you do it, and you better have a very loving family, and you better have everybody in the country basically behind you, and you wade your way through it. But it is not easy. I found during 9/11, I must have gone 4 nights a week to the opera or the symphony or chamber music. I mean, during the day, you're dealing with the horror, the lows of civilization. At night, high civilization, music. And you go to a concert, well, for one thing, you can sleep. I mean, it's not easy, and it stays with you forever. It stays with you forever. Last question. Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes, you can. The law, how do you deal with small children who died? I think 11 died on the airplanes on 9/11. The law creates a fiction. The law of torts basically says, if a small child of 6 months, let's say, died on the plane, you should assume, as a matter of law, that the small baby was 24 years old earning $50,000 a year, and calculate the award from that fiction, because otherwise you can't say nothing. I mean, you've got to come up with a basic amount, and that's what we did. That's what courts do all the time. They make an assumption about age and work life. Let me just say this in conclusion. I'm occasionally asked to speak. I rarely speak to audiences as knowledgeable as this one, as interesting as this one, who understand better than most how Jewish books of learning can help or not help, as the case may be. And Jewish ritual in particular is very helpful. How Jews grieve as a community and how they come to the rally at the Shiva and at the gravesite. Very, very important. Very important. And for the really the honor of being invited to participate today, I want to thank you all. Again, my supply of that book is inexhaustible, and you just let the powers that be know you'd like it inscribed, and I'll come over in a couple of days or whatever, and then we'll mail it back to you or whatever. But I want to thank everybody. I'm sorry I can't stay, but I've got to race and deal with Boeing. Thank you.
If you liked that video, hit the subscribe button and notification bell below for hours of the best Jewish content online.